Most people, when they start campaigns, the advice is start small. Well, I did the exact opposite. Watch, listen, see my madness, and enjoy. I've always been a fan of Conan. I've read the books, I read the comics. When I was growing up as a teenager, I was kind of weaned on both of those things. I read both Robert E. Howard, Conan, and I also read a lot of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser by Fritz Leiber, which had a very similar feel to it. So that sword and sorcery, where the swords were the good guys and the sorcery were the bad guys, I really like that. When Modiphius Publishing came out with their version of Conan, called Adventures in an Age Undreamed Of, I originally read the quick start, and I was intrigued by it. I was intrigued by a lot of the messages that were posted on the old Google Plus forums, and eventually I bought the book, and sure enough, I absolutely loved it. Some friends and we got together, and we played a campaign. Not a campaign, they created some characters. We played for about 10 or 12 sessions, and we discovered some of the weaknesses. We beat the system up pretty good, and then we decided it was time to actually play a real game. Well, I decided, and they allowed me to decide that because they're very patient folk. That brought me to my second campaign. Now, one thing I loved about Conan was the fact that, there was all of the different environs in which Conan adventured. Sometimes it was in the bitter north, sometimes it was in the sand, jungle, the forests. But I actually found that the world of Conan, I didn't really like much. The Hyborian Age, based upon Hyboria, the actual land itself, I didn't find particularly utilitarian when it came to a gaming world. I'm sure you could travel from one place to another, but as a history major, one of the things that I found kind of difficult to understand was how this great civilization was basically founded on an area which had no large bodies of water. So trade, by which most of ancient civilizations rose, was almost impossible. And of course, I know it's Conan, it shouldn't be important, but to me it was. I don't know why. Secondly, I also had this idea that I would really like, part of what I really liked about Conan were his times when he was aboard a ship. When he was, the buccaneer or the pirate or the corsair or whatever, and those adventures. And I have to admit, I was also influenced heavily by a recent computer game called Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where you basically own a ship and travel around and do a lot of fun things. And so it came to mind that I could not necessarily set it in Hyboria just because it was basically a large landmass with no areas, and I really wanted my characters to spend some time on a ship to do all those piratical activities and, weather storms and that kind of stuff. So, that said, I changed the world. And what did I change it to? Well, there are a lot of worlds that I looked at, but ultimately what I came to, and I'm not going to say I settled, because actually this was a choice, and I'm quite happy with the choice that I've made, was a setting made by a relatively unknown company called Celestia Productions, based upon the world of Lithia invented by another fellow by the name of Robin Crosby. Robin Crosby invented the world of Harn, and when he invented the world of Harn, he also invented the continent of Lithia to basically support his ideas that happened in the world of Harn. It is, for lack of a better description, a European surrogate. And so as a European surrogate, they invented something called the Venarian Sea, and in the Venarian Sea, it is essentially the Mediterranean. It is the middle sea of the continent of Lithia. And it was perfect. That's pretty much, there's no bones about exactly how well it fit for exactly what I was looking for. Today, what I'd like to do is actually go through some of the setting, some of the details, so that as you're watching the videos, you will be able to reference back to this and go, oh, that's what that is. That's where this comes from. These are some of the details in that world. I am not going to say that this is going to be an exciting video, because I don't think that it really is, but it is going to sort of give you some insight into some of the campaign stuff that I find interesting and I think I'd really like to add to the world, and why I think this particular world, or this particular world setting, can be used in a high epic fantasy game. This is This is the Venarian module. It is made, as you can see, by the people at Celestia Productions, based upon the work of Anne Robin Crosby, and it is incredibly detailed. Some of these details really help bring the campaign together, and it also takes a lot of the requirement for the GM to do some of the busybody work of a campaign out of it. Is this place in the desert? Well, this tells you. What language do they speak here? Well, this tells you that as well. What religion do they have here? This tells you. Where are the major towns? All of that. Obviously, it is a campaign module, but it goes so much beyond what most fantasy RPGs do. And for that reason, I'd like to actually sort of call out that this is an excellent work. These people are a stickler for details. There's also a very European vibe to it. Like this, whereas a lot of North American work is very much premised upon the adventurers, this is really premised upon the world. Not what the adventurers will be doing in the world, how the world lives and breathes without the characters being there. Because of that, it really helps me, as you as a GM, it might be different, but it helps me allow the characters to change the world because I know how the world normally works, and therefore what my players' interactions with the world, how it's going to change them. And that, to me, is very important. This is the map. And as you can see, this is just your basic view of the map. You can see all of the major land masses, sort of the desert areas, the actual climatology of all the different places. Mountains are all described here. The actual ocean itself. Now you think to yourself, boy, that's a decent map, pretty detailed. There's lots of possibilities. But this is just where we begin. I'm going to take you through the map in a little bit more detail later on. However, for now, what I like to do is actually talk to you about places on the map, how it works, and sort of the overall setting. Celestia begins with cultures because everything relates back to the cultures. Their history, how they've evolved, what they've been through in order to get to where they are today, etc. And they have included no less than, I think it's 8 or 9 distinctive cultures. The first culture that you have are the Gerind, who are the surrogate, I guess, for the Celts of Europe. They're an ancient people who have been constantly driven westwards by encroaching peoples from the east. They are spiritual. They have a very distinctive spiritualism to them, which is close to the land. Then you have the Pharric peoples. The Pharric peoples are the people who basically chased the Gerind. The Pharric peoples are Germanic races, Franks and Goths and all of those kind of people. Very aggressive, very military, very strongly motivated for independence. You have the Azeri. The Azeri are Romans. There's no real way to kind of get around that. The Azeri are a colonizing folk, a civilized folk. They're driven to civilization. They, by nature, change the world when they encounter it. They build things, they invent things, and at the same time, they're very loath to give up the pleasures of the flesh. Then you have the Qatari. The Qatari folk are nomadic by nature, and their restless nature has driven them to explore and conquer a huge portion of the area of Lithia. They are, in Conan terms, Hyrcanians, in Earth terms, Mongols, but their cultures, not only when they conquer a place, they'll actually settle that place and change it, and directly create cultures related to that. The most ancient of the cultures, the Delkeshi, are actually a Qatari offshoot of people. Then you have the Mafani. The Mafani are probably the oldest of all of the cultures. The original human empire was an empire called the Empire of Mafan. They're based far to the south, but their influence did come as far as the Venarian Sea. And so some of the most ancient of the ruins, the most basic and cryptic of ruins, are actually of Mafani nature. Today, in the Venarian Sea or the Middle Sea area. You will see the occasional Mafani as a wealthy merchant or an enterprising tradesman, but apart from that, they're very rare. Anzalorians are those people who dwelt upon the continent directly south of the Venarian Sea. They probably are analogous to Africans, although their culture tends to be a little bit more unified than the African culture. So they are tribal, but at the same time, they once housed very large empires, which are now shadowed in secrecy of the ancient past. Secrets that perhaps my players will one day explore. Then you have the Hepicurians. Hepicurians are sort of a strange amalgamation of a variety of things, and they're basically divided into two pieces. The first is the Hepicurians, who are basically the desert dwellers, and then the Hepicurians who have settled. So you kind of have a combination of those two, and they look upon each other with a certain amount of disdain. One considers the other one to be barbaric. The other one considers their softer neighbors to have somehow become weak. Lastly, you have the Elder Folk, and the Elder Folk have sort of a unique history in the Lithian world in that they are late arrivals. They arrived from somewhere, and no one really knows where. There are a variety of these races, the Sinai or the Sindarin being like what we would call elves, but they can change what they look like. They can appear as other people, meaning that they can blend into human society with ease. The question then becomes, what is their true form? Many people, when they play Harn, they relate them directly to elves, and they are called the Elves of Harn, but they're not really elves. Similar to the Khazd-dûl, who are the dwarves, also have some very distinctive features that make them not Tolkien dwarves. Again, very interesting. The differences, the subtlety in the differences, I think, is what makes it so enrapturing. It's like when you read it, you want to know more. For religions, there are a variety of first off, the world is polytheistic. There are multiple religions, multiple gods, but what they've done is, in order to make the gods more understandable, is every society worships the same gods, but in different fashions. So in the Venarian Sea, the gods who are most prevalent are Ogric, Eoni, Varani, and Save, or Save Nor, depending on whether or not you use the full name. And they are called different things and worshipped in different ways by different people. So a Delkeshi priest might worship different than an Azeri priest, might worship different than a Hepicurian or Pharaoh priest. Meaning that although the religion's the same, there is a very unique cultural feel to the entire world. Everywhere you go, they worship the gods slightly differently. So for the gods, the first one is Ogric. Ogric is, some people consider him to be an evil god. Officially, his portfolio is power, fire, war, and authority. And he's considered to be, in some places, a god of savage battle. Okay. In other places, he's considered to be the rightful king of authority, of nobility. He is the god that you worship when you are a powerful state. Now, interestingly, the creator of the game, Robin Crosby, he was a big fan of the Petal Throne, Empire of the Petal Throne of Tucumel, by whose author I'm afraid I cannot remember at this moment. And so a lot of his senses about what the god should be like, a lot of his ideas, they came from gods of Tucumel who were unknowable, is probably the best way to describe it. They had their own motivations. And so Ogric, although he is the Lord of Fire, and he rides into battle with his horsemen who are called the Vahir, who are essentially demons, he's good or evil depending on how you regard him. To some people, he's a lawbringer. To other people, he's the maker of wastes. Who knows? That's for you to decide. Then you have Eone. Eone is basically the goddess of the earth. She's the patron of agriculture and healing. She is the mother. And most people don't really have too much problem interpreting her as a good goddess. It is where you go to be healed. It is she that you ask to bless your crops. Whether you worship Ogric or one of the other gods, it is to her that you'll go for healing. Varane. Varane is the lady of honor, civilization, and the sea, or water. She is the goddess who prevents the worst excesses of Ogric. And in some religions, these are sort of opposite sides of the same coin. On one side, you have Ogric, who is the lord of battle, and then on the other side, you have Varane, the defender of the weak, etc. She is a militant goddess. She's commonly seen with a sword, and most of her saints are warrior saints. But she's a different god of battle. Save is the god of knowledge, puzzles, and the wind or the air, the sky. He is not a keeper of mysteries. He's a keeper of knowledge, and so his priests share their knowledge evenly throughout the world to anybody who asks for it. He also is the maker of puzzles. So he is the god in the world who makes the unknowable knowable through the senses. His priests, you have the lore masters, but then you also have jesters. There's actually an order of priests who are people who actually travel and disgorge knowledge through revealing truth by cynicism. It's, like I said, a very interesting religion. Well, I find it very interesting. You also have Halea. Now, Halea is the lady of wealth, trade, and pleasure. She is the god of the flesh, of all the things of the flesh. And as such, her temples are opulent. Merchants worship her. But people who follow Ogric or Larane, who tend to be more state gods, they tend to think as followers of Halea as weak, money-pinching, etc. The other god, now I pair these gods sometimes in my realms as the dark twins. Halea, who is the goddess of opulence and having everything, and then Neve. And Neve is the god of outcasts and thieves. So in other words, the god of having nothing. He is worshipped by a lot of people who have no place else to go. He brings vengeance to those who have been unrighteously punished. His assassins are known to be some of the most vicious and dedicated assassins in the known world, but at the same time he is rarely seen, and there are no open temples to him. Kind of an interesting concept. Morgoth as written is a god who was once a god who dreamed of more power, and in dreaming of more power he was seduced by the shadow of Bukrai. And the Bukrai it's the unknowable. It is basically entropy gone mad, the unmaking of everything. And eventually he became, rather than the god of death, the god of unlife and undeath. He is the god of people who wish to live forever by any means necessary. Yeah, kind of a specific cult. But there it is. So I have a god which I've modified in my game. The god officially is Serayin, who is the kind of a Norse god of war and honor. But in my world, he's called Araje. Araje is a sort of a god of war and battle, but he is modified slightly for the Middle Sea. He is lesser known and more worshipped amongst savages than civilized races. So amongst the barbarians of Quarfor and Anzaloria and Hepacaria, he is he who dwells in the wastes and protects the barbaric heart of humanity. Yeah. And then finally, Zarath. Zarath is a god of illusions, dreams, mysteries. It's he who speaks to you in your dreams. The rune casters, they receive dreams from Zarath and visions, etc. Those are basically the gods. Now, there are some other minor gods, spirits, etc., that are worshipped locally, but for the mainstay, that's what you'll find in organized religion. The history of Lithia is very intense. It covers several pages, but is basically divided up into 6 major periods. First, you have legendary period, and this is the period which happened basically. First, actually, let's begin with the current date is 720 Tuzin reckoning. Now, Tuzin is a soothsayer from Meldarine, an island which has it's a tiny island with a tiny population, but it is considered to be the magic island. It's a focus of ley lines from all over the world, and because of that, many scholars travel there. One of those was a fellow by the name of Tuzine, and he started the calendar at the founding of the Kingdom of Meldarine. That calendar has since found adoption throughout a good portion of the world, not all of it, but a good portion of the world, and it's called Tuzin Reckoning. Tuzin Reckoning, it is currently the year 720, so the Kingdom of Meldarine was founded 720 years ago. Before Tuzin Reckoning is called BT, before Tuzin, and it is basically, it dates back for forever. The legendary period dates back to over 10,000 years ago, like over 100 centuries. And it housed an age of legends. So obviously, legendary period. First off, there is an empire from which the people have disappeared and have been gone for over 150 centuries, called the Earth Masters. No one really knows who they were. They were slightly bigger than humans if you were to judge by their structures. And they built strange structures. Strange because people don't really know what they're designed to do. They'll have structures that emit light above them at certain times of the year that can be seen for leagues. They have a bowl, an artifact where you put something into it and it turns it into kind of like a slurry, almost fungal mass. Why? No one knows. Their structures are impervious to harm. Whatever it was that built them is no longer makeable, but at the same time, these structures they look the same as they did before. There was also a period of time after the departure of the Earth Masters, and maybe related to the Earth Masters, no one really knows, called Nadar Tem. Now, Nadar Tem is kind of this world's Atlantis, a civilization of ancient human beings who rose to great power, and then at the height of their power, their realm sank beneath the waves for some reason. Some cataclysm occurred. No one really knows why. You had the arrival of the Elder Peoples. It was during this time that, they suddenly appeared in the world out of nowhere, led by beings who were at least semi-divine in nature. And then finally, you have the rise of the great human empires. In particular, the empire that would be most useful in my setting is the Empire of Mafan, which of course is the southern empire that, sort of spread civilization to what is now the Middle Sea area. Second period you have is called the Megalith period, and this is a period of early man is probably the best way to describe it. The great civilizations have fallen, new civilizations have risen, and those civilizations are beginning to build things and to show how great they are. Because it's called the megalithic period because during this time people were building big things for which we don't necessarily know what their purpose is. Rings of stone, ziggurats. Again, these things dot the countryside, dot the landscape, and for many of them it is unknown exactly what their purpose was or who taught them to make these things. Then you have the migrations period. So after the megalith period, which is basically a period where people didn't really move around a lot, you had the migrations period. And essentially, the East moved west. That's probably the best way to describe it. And everybody was driven. The Jirin people were driven by the Ferric people, who were driven by the people who are now the Rexini or the Qatari people. This meant that all of the land was kind of mixed up. All the people were mixed together. It was all the races were mixed up. Okay. The fascinating thing about this period of time was it was where you really saw the interaction of all the different people. So the elder people united with the Jirin to try to fight off the Ferric people. And those alliances still exist today, and those hatreds still exist today. Foundations period comes next, and this is where the kingdoms that we see today are begin to found, like where the people finally reach their final cultural destination. They now live there, like the Quarforians live in Quarfor, the Shorkini arrived in Shorkine. The people actually arrived in places where they would eventually form countries. They're at this point tribal, but they will become greater. And you finally have, during this period, the foundation of Meldarine in the west. So this is about the time when Meldarine began to become settled, and people decided that something was going to happen here, and they finally elected a king. After this, after the foundation period where these kingdoms were settled, came the last major change in the world, and that was the imperial period of the Azerjani Empire. The Azeri people, they fought a great tribal war, out of which the people of Meopolis, which is the capital of Azerjan, it finally grew to a point where they could actually begin to conquer other peoples. And once they started, they really couldn't stop. Most of the Venarian Sea fell either under their power directly or as a satrapy of the Azerjani Empire. Unlike the Roman Empire, they didn't last quite that long, but their influence on society has been pronounced. A lot of the buildings, a lot of the major buildings, a lot of the infrastructure was all built by the Azeri when their Azerjani Empire grew to its state it is today. One of the things that was also translated was a lot of their religions found their footholds during this time. The Azerjani Empire eventually fell, mainly due to internal reasons, very similar to Rome. And now the Azerjani Empire has not disappeared. Azerjan is still a united state. It is quite large. So you would find yourself sort of in this period towards the end of, I guess, the time period technology-wise would be sort of towards the end of the imperial age of Rome. So about 300 to 400 AD. Late Iron Age, steel has been invented, all those kind of good things. And the colonizing, the smashing of Western civilization by the Hunnish hordes hasn't happened, and probably won't happen during this game. Okay, the major powers. So when we talk about the major powers, there are about I would guess 6 or 7 that are going to probably be prevalent within this campaign. The first off are the Western states, which in Conan terms, I'm going to relate a lot of these to the Conan game again, because of course we're playing Conan, and so their role will be very similar to what you would find in Conan, right? So the Western states, Palathane, Emelrine, Shorkine, Quarfor, these states are the dreaming West. They are basically these great states, the states of Aquilonia, Zingara, all of those places which are energetic, dry, they're vibrant, they're youthful, right? They are fiery. They want to grow to become something great, and so they are now struggling to do so. Many of these states were born out of the collapse of the Azerjani Empire, but that doesn't matter. They want to be great. Then you have the actual Azerjani Empire. The Azerjani Empire is old, dark, and corrupt. If I say those words, you probably know exactly what I mean. Meopolis, the capital, it is invaded with corruption. It is stagnant, unable to change because it's just so heavy under the weight of how many people are there and what is necessary to change that being all but an impossibility. Then you have the Caregian League. The Caregian League is a group of islands, at one point ruled by the Azeri, but now independent. And they are a mercantile league. There are many city-states, and so you could easily equate this to classic Greece. Classic Greece, of course, had multiple city-states. They had multiple kingdoms. They all had different ways of ruling. They were all very mercantile. That is Caregian League. Beria is a Venarian stronghold. They are probably the best version of a Puritan state. They are ruled by an empress. In fact, all the political positions are held by women, who believes that she is the divine servant or avatar of Verani herself. And thus she rules with religious fervor. You have the Empire of Delkesh. Empire of Delkesh is the ancient empire. This is one of the oldest civilizations in the world, anywhere. They were a satrapy under the Asuryani, and they kind of just waited for the Asuryani to burn themselves out. And then they went back to doing things as they've always done them. They are ruled by a powerful king who commands ultimate power. He is considered to be semi-divine. He's not, but he's considered to be. You could equate this to an Egyptian culture, or if you were to go back to Conan, it would be Shemitish or Stygian. A lot of dark crevices, a lot of unseen things roaming the corners. And then lastly, to the west, you have Hypercaria. Hypercaria is kind of Moroccan in flavor, I think, would probably be the best way to describe it. Moroccan, Tunisian, Arabic. The idea is that it is a vibrant society of people who evolved out of the sands and eventually settled down. They have a variety of different cultures, a variety of different passions, and their people are proud, and they were never conquered wholly by the Asuryani, for which they are incredibly proud. A lot of that had to do with a good portion of Hypercaria being desert, and the Asuryani didn't want it, but, don't tell them that. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip back to the map here, and I'm just going to go through some of the settings that you can actually find on the map, just to basically go over the detail that you can actually find, and how I find these things useful when I'm actually GMing. So the first thing that I like to do here is just do a quick swap. Okay, so here we see the map. Now, this is the map with most of the settings turned off. You can, for example, you can put a regional code on, and when Celestia and Columbia Games, who share this product, by the way, when they do things, they actually break it up into these squares. So when you buy, for example, Harn, you'll get everything included in the square that includes Harn. If you bought Azur-Yan, you would get everything that included Azur-Yan. They also have put a 5. These are hexes, okay? So what you're seeing here, you have to zoom in, really zoom in. These are hexes, and what the hexes actually represent is 12.5 miles. So the entire thing is essentially meant to be explored, however you wish. Latitude, longitudes, these are the major minor ones that are actually put in. Again, all of this is developed by the company, okay? Major geography is currently turned on, and that includes basically all of the mountains, etc. But you can also add things like, where are all the major towns? There they are. Where are all the regional towns, right? Where are the actual realms? So this actually adds, for example, the Empire Azur-Yan, the Empire of Beria. It actually adds individual states to all of this. To that, we can also add the borders, which allows us to actually see where all of these kingdoms are. This is the map that I generally use right here, just because it allows me to tell when people have arrived in one king from another. But you can go further than that, actually add things like, all the provinces. How are they ruled, right? A small thing, but consider that in order to have done that, you actually had to have drawn the map and consider where the provinces needed to be laid out, which is kind of interesting. They also have the ability to add trade goods. So these are what are actually available from all of these places. So if you're playing a campaign like I am, and you happen to be traveling, and somebody might say, oh, hey, we're going to, here in the Empire of Delkesh, this island happens to be a slave market. So when they go to the town, that's what they'll find. All of the trade routes, who travels where, how does that trade work? All of the actual routes, like all of the actual major roads. And then finally, we're actually going to start looking at how this looks. Now I'm going to turn off a bunch of this stuff right now. And what we're going to do here is, this map, these are the towns that existed these are ancient towns. These are considered to be, these are towns that existed during the foundation of Meldarine. Okay? Then you have the Azeri Wars. So this actually talks to you about, how all of the Azeri conquered everything, right? Then you have the expansion. These are all the places that were actually covered by the Azeri. Then finally you have at the height of the empire, this is what it looked like. Okay? And then finally, that's Azerbaijan at the height of the empire, including all of their partners or all of their neighbors, and all of their states, which were actually under their rule. So far you're thinking, wow, that's a lot of detail. Well, it goes beyond that. We also have, if you want to date back to the migration era, this is actually, as I talked about, this is when all the different peoples moved. Well, this is how they moved and how they got there. And so if I was thinking to myself, where did these people come from and what kind of ruins might I find there? I could go back to this and actually see, well, this might be this kind of ruin. This is the actual ancient world. So these are all the different peoples and where they came from. Okay. This is where we start getting into the minutiae, which is pretty impressive. These are tides, the tidal effects, okay, and how powerful they are. This is the precipitation overlay. How much rain do they get? What kind of rain do they get? This is the wind patterns, okay? Ocean currents. This is a lot of work, okay? And then finally, you have tectonics. These are where the tectonic plates are, so if you want to figure out where volcanoes might be. Now, I kind of glanced over this with, in my detail of the actual, of the world. In Harn, there are about 10 or 12 root languages. Actually, no, sorry, there's about 10 root languages. However, all of the dialects are actually detailed. Now, for myself, I only use root languages. 10 root languages is plenty for the complexity that I'm looking for in my campaign. However, this represents what the actual language groups in the world look like. Each of the different colors represents a different language, and where they intermingle, you'll see the variance of colors. So here you have Qatari language, and you notice that it's spoken up here in Rexini, but it's also spoken down here in the Beshekan Desert. It tells you exactly how widespread this language is, right? Azeri is orange, right? It's spoken throughout the Azerbaijani Peninsula, but also over here along the northern coast of Hapacaria and in Beria. This is pretty impressive, and it also makes it so that when somebody travels, I can quickly glance at this and know exactly what the influences are. If they speak a language, chances are they've been influenced by that language. Again, kudos to the creators of this. I don't know that I could ever create this much detail myself. Then the climate zones: hot, cold, temperate, dry, arid, all listed by color. Precipitation. Someone had to do it, I guess. Okay, and that's the map. As you can see, this tool makes it incredibly easy for a GM such as myself to run a sandboxy game where people are traveling all over the world and understand when they got there, I know what language they speak, I know what the temperature is going to be, I know what the ancient civilizations look like, I know how long these people have been here, I know what they trade there, I know all of those things. And if you are a methodologist, one of the things I think is important when it comes to sandboxes is understanding the economics, right? If a place is rich, it generates a certain type of adventure. If a place is poor, it generates a different kind of adventure. If certain things are sold there and certain things are bought in other places, that generates a different kind of adventure again. Obviously, players who come from the north where there isn't as much slavery and they arrive here and they arrive in a place that, it's a major slave market, that produces adventure. And all of those things I know because the Celestia people went ahead before me and actually put this map together. So this was kind of I don't know, this was a sales pitch for the Celestia module, this Venarian module, but this is the world into which I have set my Conan campaign, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to me. If you've got to the very end, I thank you for being patient. Yeah, I hope to see you at the gaming table. Thanks for watching.